It feels like for a while now we've been talking about a new era. In 2016, WWE announced it was a new era over and over. They proceeded to have one fantastic year before things took a dip for quite a few years following that. Triple H's takeover of WWE Creative can definitely be considered a new era because there was actual tangible evidence that things were changing. It began with a shift in direction of things, focusing on long-term storytelling over just short-term payoffs. It hasn't been perfect, but it's important to remember that we're literally just 2 years into what some refer to as the Renaissance era. But in our minds, the real new era is going to begin on January 6th, 2024, when Raw moves to Netflix. So how exactly is this going to mark a new era of WWE? Join us as we tell you just why this is such a big deal and how it's going to change wrestling forever. WWE has wanted to pivot to streaming for over a decade now. Netflix was beginning to pick up steam in the early 2010s, and in 2013 in particular was a landmark year because they aired their first original series, House of Cards. It was great for what it was at the time if you remove all the Kevin Spacey related controversy, and ears all over the world began to perk up regarding the possible future of streaming. One of those companies that was ahead of the curve was WWE, which was in the midst of working on the WWE Network. The vision was to use the decades worth of content they had and directly benefit from it themselves by building the required infrastructure to host a paid, online platform where younger fans of WWE in particular could go as a one-stop shop. Priced at a modest $9.99 a month, it was a steal if you were a wrestling fan because you had access to all kinds of past content and pay-per-views, current and future pay-per-views, NXT and the incredible takeover shows, other original content, and more. It wasn't exactly a moneymaker for WWE, but that didn't matter too much at the time because their revenue was still on an upward trajectory. It was okay to use it as a loss leader for a few years while they acquired a large chunk of subscriptions. The hope would be that they would eventually get enough paying subscribers to make a profit, but in any case, they also had a platform where they could air their flagship TV shows, Raw and SmackDown, in the event of a broadcast deal falling through. Over half a decade later, the WWE Network experiment ended with them signing a billion-dollar deal with Peacock, the streaming platform on NBC Universal. Before we get into the Netflix side of things, we'd like to give some context on why WWE decided to pivot away from the network. For one, a platform like Peacock has a much further reach from mainstream perspective, and it was the equivalent of putting it on a bigger broadcast network. Secondly, money. How can we deny the money part of it? During the time of the Peacock deal announcement, WWE had around 1.5 million subscribers paying $9.99 a month. That works out to be about $180 million a year as opposed to the $200 million a year they get from NBC. While the difference may not seem too massive for a multi-billion-dollar juggernaut like WWE, the context is key here. WWE had to host its own platform, which resulted in a lot of expenses, from hosting servers to creating content to paying corporate overhead. In the case of the Peacock deal, it's almost entirely $200 million of pure profit. The third reason, which is almost just as important, is the trend of market consolidation when it comes to streaming. We saw a whole boom of streaming platforms come out with everyone wanting a piece of the pie. With the clear knowledge that only a few can win in this game, it makes sense for WWE to shift towards a giant like Netflix, which is the undisputed #1 name in the streaming industry. We wouldn't expect a lot of swearing or blood or edginess that many fans are hoping to see. On one hand, there's the desire to go back to the Attitude Era, but those in charge know that even an era as great as that is viewed with rose-tinted glasses. Triple H made it clear that WWE isn't moving away from the PG direction, but that doesn't mean nothing will change. We wouldn't be surprised to see small changes occur like obscene crowd chants not being censored. We would also anticipate things like no abrupt cutoff times and perhaps a bit of a liberal approach in terms of things that could be said. But the real change lies in two key areas that made WWE what they are today: the production and the storytelling. In terms of the production, you're still going to see a WWE product, but they're already quite ahead of the game in terms of show production, and that is something that can be turned up to an even greater volume. It's probably going to start with WWE only having small production changes, which we expect will lead to impatient fans complaining about how they expected more because of the $500 million a year. But in reality, WWE is still in an experimental stage with the future of their production. There are going to be ideas floating around, and once the ball starts rolling and the hype and allure of the Raw on Netflix deal dies down, WWE will be able to quietly experiment with various ways of presenting the product. Rather than being a radical change, it's going to be more about building the strength that WWE already has in the production department. But what it's going to do is upgrade it to the point where anything else seems inferior. What we expect is certain levels of innovation that other wrestling companies are going to have to follow if they can afford to do so. But it's also likely that the influence of the upgraded production will pour onto other sports like American football, mixed martial arts, and maybe even baseball, hockey, or soccer/football. If you look at each decade of WWE programming, there's a drastic difference in the quality of production as it keeps growing and evolving. The 2020s have seen a few little changes here and there, but this is going to be the one that sets the standard for maybe the next 10 years or more. Now to the second part, storytelling. This is a department that WWE has either done extremely well in or flopped quite hard depending on which era of WWE you watched. But there is a general trend, like we mentioned earlier, 2017 onward was a downward slump, especially in the storytelling department. Late 2022 onwards, we saw an upward trajectory in the consistency and quality of storytelling. We're not sure about how the dynamic is going to be between Netflix and their interference and how they want things done in WWE, but we can only hope that the sports entertainment juggernaut is left to their own devices and the people in charge of telling stories are given the canvas to paint on. We can only imagine that the gargantuan $500 million a year deal saw TKO ensure that they get creative freedom. But still, the streaming audience is a drastically different one than the broadcast TV audience. Cable cutting has been happening at a rapid rate for years now, so it's always been a fairly older demographic tuning into TV. As of January 6th, WWE's reach around the globe will expand even more, giving them access to a massive audience with very different demands. The goal will always be to hook in new viewers and make them stay, and for Netflix, it's all about their entry into live sports and entertainment, and hoping that there are enough WWE fans who will pay the Netflix fee mainly to watch WWE and stick around for a while. From WWE's perspective, this may change how they tell their stories, especially leading from one episode to the next and one premium live event to the next. This could manifest in a good way and a bad way. In terms of the bad way, it might mean the slight Netflixification of the content. In case you're wondering what that is, it describes the phenomenon where Netflix executives give direct feedback to people creating shows for their platform, instructing them that the show they're producing is only the secondary screen while their phones are their primary screens. It sounds insane, but many Netflix shows are produced with the full knowledge that people are staring at their phones and using the show as background noise to distract them from dealing with their own thoughts. We hope this doesn't happen to WWE because the way of telling stories is quite straightforward and easy to understand, so to dumb it down even more and repeat the same things over and over to remind people what something is would be a huge step back. On the positive side of things, it might mean that we get a lot more cliffhangers and a way of telling stories that directly dangles a carrot in front of fans, making the next episode a must-watch. There might be a greater focus on engaging storytelling, bringing an aspect of reality even further into the wrestling realm. The specialty of wrestling is the fact that it's easy to blur the lines between fiction and reality. We expect WWE to go into this in a much greater way in an attempt to produce iconic and memorable segments that get engagement on social media, thus translating the streaming hours for WWE and subscription payments for Netflix. Whether it's edgy content or not, one thing is almost certain: there are going to be a few stars on the men's and women's side that are going to benefit from this in a huge way. It's going to be another healthy competition between superstars who want to get that viral moment and improve themselves and turn themselves into even bigger superstars. We expect a certain level of creative freedom to be given to even those who don't necessarily deserve it that much. The result is that some might flounder, while a select few become even bigger superstars. Every few years we see a crop of superstars rise in popularity. Take Rhea Ripley in 2023 and Drew McIntyre in 2024 for example. We're going to see a handful more make a name for themselves in a race to be as authentic as possible. The authenticity of certain superstars is going to be what distinguishes them as big superstars or not. Sure, names like Cody Rhodes, Roman Reigns, and John Cena are going to be huge boosts to the early stages of Raw on Netflix, But what's even more exciting is how it's going to create even newer stars. Perhaps we're just a bit too optimistic about it all, and maybe there won't be as much change as we expect. But all signs seem to point to a bit of an internal revolution that's going to create new stars, change the standard of the production to even greater heights, and establish new ways of telling stories, thus taking wrestling into the future for the next decade and more. It's going to be a landmark moment that we speak about for years, and you heard it here first. Thanks for watching.